Hara Takashi was Prime Minister of Japan during a critical time in the nation's development of democracy. In 1918, when he became Prime Minister, the cabinet he appointed marked a significant feat in establishing a proper parliamentary cabinet, as it was the first one in Japan's history consisting of predominantly elected officials. He was a moderate in a time when the people were demanding a more democratic electoral process to give them a governing power that is voted by and representative of the people. The aristocratic class in the House of Peers opposed this movement and wanted to maintain the governing system as it was, with its remaining feudal elements such as the genro, elder statesmen, as the main moving mechanisms behind government. And in 1921, Hara Takashi had become unfavored by these two forces and was assassinated by a young far-right nationalist who believed the old days of samurai cultivated better individuals than this new age that was emerging from the Meiji Restoration. Hara Takashi is a useful case study to analyze the key developments occurring in this period at the height of his political career during the Taisho era, which has been dubbed by scholars as the Taisho democracy, a period running from 1912 to 1926, coinciding with the reign of Emperor Taisho and characterized by the introduction of manhood suffrage in 1925. Though he died in 1921 before universal male suffrage was instituted, Hara Takashi and his party were an integral part in the development towards democratizing the nation by pushing to give Parliament the power and political recognition it was due. Through Hara Takashi's careers and premiership to the demand for suffrage and the conflicts Hara dealt with leading up to his assassination, the Meiji Constitution of 1889 influenced the trajectory of them all. In the late 19th century, Hara Takashi first worked as a journalist while simultaneously involving himself in politics, holding various minister positions from 1895 and then from 1902 to 1908 being elected each year into the House of Representatives, turning from journalism in 1906 to dedicate himself fully to party affairs. He had been an instrumental member of the Seikai Party since its foundation by Prime Minister Ito Hirobumi in 1900, and from this advancement in party activities partially supported by ruling elites, there was an increased fervor to achieve a party-run government. Now, at the turn of the century, since the first Diet formed in 1990 after the Meiji Constitution's promulgation in 1889, Japan had been run by genro who occupied the legislative imperial Diet and who influenced executive functions as advisors to the emperor. As opposed to these genro who were not mentioned anywhere in the constitution, partymen like Hara Takashi validated their ambitions of party expansion by asserting that a party government system best complemented the nature of the Constitution's foundational principles, an argument that was made possible by the ambiguity in the decrees of how the nation would be run. Articles 33, 34, and 35 of the Constitution declare that the Imperial Diet is to be comprised of a House of Peers, which will be composed of members of nobility and from the imperial family that have been selected by the Emperor, and of a House of Representatives that will be elected by the public. These articles lay the institutional foundation for democratic government, with a place for partymen in the House of Representatives. But Chapter 1 of the Constitution introduces possible authoritarianism as well, with Article 1 deeming that the Empire of Japan is to be reigned over and governed by the Emperor, with the exceptions such as Article 5, which restrains its legislative power by making it require the approval of the Imperial Diet. In the 1900s, the Emperor was under the counsel of the genro, who were essentially an oligarchy that ran government, with cliques it selected into the Diet through the Emperor, and who, to keep their hold on the Diet, sought to diminish the possibility of party leadership of the House of Representatives. Amid this tension, Article 29, that guaranteed people would have the freedom of speech, writing, publication, and meeting within the boundaries of law, was still upheld even while parties tried to expand their influence. This right to publication and speech let Hara Takashi and other journalists pursue their writing without direct censorship in these turbulent times, even while they were voicing their grievances with the elite cliques in the Diet and the limited perspective of the people in government. And by allowing public meetings, Article 29 also supported the Protect Constitutional Government movement in 1912. The Protect Constitutional Government movement was inspired by the unconstitutional organization of government and had the objective of protecting constitutional government by means of destroying clique government. The zeal behind this movement had been growing for years. Political parties had been growing in the 1900s and had strong support from the people, seen by the support Hara Takashi had from the people after his rally speech in 1909, where he declared that the country ought to be run by majority opinion. The people themselves had also become increasingly determined in their demand for a more democratic system of government, equipped with cultivated social ideas coming in from the West. These ideas spread through the country thanks to the high literacy rate that resulted from the educational reforms installed under Emperor Meiji. The constitution was another factor influencing people to interact with new ideas, its preamble listing promoting the growth of one's moral and intellectual potential as a reason for its promulgation. The people just needed a catalyst to move them to outright protest, demanding democratic government. And that came in 1912 at the beginning of Emperor Taisho's reign. The majority party in the House of Representatives was the Seijukai, Hara Takashi's party led by Saionji at the time. The Seijukai disagreed with the militarists in the Dai to expand the army, and thus in retaliation the army did not provide a minister for the cabinet, and government could not be formed. This maneuver to sabotage the validity of the House of Representatives led to the climax of the public's outrage with the Genro and cliques in the Diet. Up until this point, the Genro selected the Prime Minister and the Emperor appointed him. But to realize a more democratic and constitutionally aligned system, the people clamored for the Prime Ministers to be selected by the majority party in the House of Representatives. Thus, thousands gathered and rioted against clique government during the first few months of Taisho's rule. The most significant instance of such riots, however, was in 1918. The rice riots in 1918 were caused by inflated rice prices that led to the people's anger at rice merchants and the government that, rather than controlling prices, suppressed rioters instead. Quelled by the military itself, these nationwide riots were a consequential demonstration of the force of public opinion. As a result, the cabinet in power was dissolved and the Genro, now trying to garner the public's favor, decided a new cabinet would be created by the majority party in the House of Representatives. Hara Takashi of the Seijukai party was thus chosen to be leader of the party and prime minister, and with the responsibility of forming a new cabinet, he appointed mostly members of the Seijukai party as ministers, the only exception being the ministers of the army and navy. This was a pivotal step in Japan's democratization, with 1918 marking the year of Japan's first commoner serving as prime minister, and more importantly, the first cabinet consisting primarily of party members. With his party cabinet, Hara Takashi actualized the ambition he and fellow partymen had of reaching a proper representational democracy. As an advocate of peace, he participated in international peace conferences and held the militarists in check, lessening the oppression of Korea and removing the military's administration of the country. Hara Takashi met the people's demands for more voting rights by lowering the restrictive qualifications, lowering the tax payment amount, and required length of time of residence in one's electoral district. As of May 1919, the revised law doubled the number of eligible voters to 3 million. This increase was not satisfactory to many, however, and the demand to enfranchise all adult males now grew to new heights. Since the rice riots, people recognized that they could exert pressure to get proper representation of their will, and were determined to do so. Conflict between Hara Takashi and public opinion developed as universal suffrage gained strong support in the larger cities. As a moderate, he often gave warnings against incorporating such Western ideas into Japan too quickly, and though he was open-minded to the concept of universal suffrage, he deemed that a foundation needed to be built to support it first by revision of electoral law. But with Article 35 commanding the House of Representatives to be made up of members elected by the public, the only true representation would be one where everyone, at this time only adult males, had the right to vote. Therefore, until this was achieved, the suffrage movement would become a series of riots. In February 1920, suffrage riots occurred throughout Tokyo and in the House of Representatives itself, as the opposition attacked the Seijukai for opposing universal suffrage. Later in March, Hara Takashi dissolved the Diet and left the issue to be decided on through election. This was done to create a new Diet with more like-minded Seijukai members in it, based on the assumption that they would be elected as the majority, thanks to their supporters in the countryside who were mostly disinterested in suffrage. This was indeed the outcome of the May election, with the larger cities with labor issues supporting suffrage, while the country districts secured the Seijukai majority win. This disagreement on universal suffrage led to the public's dislike of Hara Takashi. He was already disliked by the elite, militarists, and nationalists because of his openness to peace negotiations and the fact that he ousted them from government control. And as November of 1921 was approaching, the general public was still in support of Hara Takashi's movements towards peace at least, and supported the upcoming Washington Naval Disarmament Conference and the cuts to the military's budget. This conference was a significant moment in settling the naval arms race of the early 20th century. Takashi was expected to play a key role in defining Japan's role in international issues, establishing Japan's diplomatic policy going forward, and sorting out a compromise with China surrounding Shandong. But none of this came to pass, as he was stabbed to death by far-right nationalist youth at a railroad station in Tokyo, November 4, 1921, the day before the conference. By seeking to expand party representation in the Diet and working to accommodate the people's wish for voting rights, ambitions both inspired and validated by the Meiji Constitution of 1889, Takashi shaped Japan during this pivotal period of Japan's democratization. By overcoming the authority of the Genro, who had no article or law to justify the power they held over the governing body in the country, he earned the enmity of militarists and extremists and met his end by assassination. The ambiguity of the Constitution resulted in the possibilities for an authoritarian or democratic government. Inspired and educated through encouragement of the Constitution, the people of Japan fought for their rights to representation in government and eliminated the barriers to it. In spring of 1925, universal suffrage was granted, enfranchising 4 million more men. However, this was won with the sacrifice of more restraints on the constitutional right to free speech and public meeting. Enacted April 12, 1925, Article 1 of the Peace Preservation Law allowed the imprisonment and punishment of those who could be framed with the intention of changing the national polity, how the country is organized and governed, effectively banning further demonstrations that had pushed the government into the form it now held, demonstrations that brought about universal suffrage.